1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 19 through 23. We're going to reference that scripture tonight, all right? So I don't want you to look for historicity or context in perspective of this text or full credulity of this text, but I'm going to reference this scripture tonight to bring to light this philosophy that I'm going to teach you tonight as we continue in this series. Now, this series, expansion, everybody say expansion. Expansion is, this series of expansion is for the purpose of life growth and church growth, all right? It's for the purpose of life growth and church growth. I love to see people taking notes. It is the expanding of the mind outside of what you've known, what you're most familiar with and accustomed to. Expanding your perspective, expanding your view that will reshape your opinions. So tonight's subject is expand me and expose me. Expand me and expose me. And I'm going to deal with tonight expanding your mind for the capacity to handle more growth and development. And now, consequently, one of the problems we are facing in pastoring is presenting an expanded vision to a people with very little experience or exposure, or trying to teach people who think their past experience and exposure is on a level that is not. Right? Please don't miss anything I'm saying tonight. Now, some of you, you really think, and whenever God gives me a word, especially in this season from Mount Moriah, particular persons come to my mind as I'm preparing the message. There's particular people that God puts in my spirit, so I always know that whenever I'm staying, I'm talking to someone. And some of you think that you are thriving in certain areas, but you only think that because your experience and exposure in that area is so small that you are oblivious to the fact that there are levels to this above where you stand. And some people become arrogant only because their experience and exposure is greater than their surroundings, which is why they stay in certain circles that pet their ego instead of stepping into circles that challenge their capacity, right? So the law of exposure, please write this down. The law of exposure states that what you expose yourself to dramatically shapes how you think, feel, and act. The law of exposure states what you expose yourself to dramatically shapes how you think, feel, and act. Our mind is receptive by nature, and hence every exposure leaves an imprint on our mind. Our mind then starts thinking about it and gradually shapes our thinking, feeling, and behavior accordingly. And we are not even aware of the subtle programming. To understand it a little better, pay attention to what exposure you are giving your mind, your body, and your soul. Watch your thoughts, your feelings, and actions over the course of 24 hours. The type of food that you eat, the books that you read, the images that you watch, the people that you hang out with, the conversation that you're holding with yourself and with others, suggestions, opinions, criticisms, or encouragement that you receive from others. Check out your own responses or reactions towards situations, things, and people. Choices you make when it comes to spending your time, your money, and energy. So forth and so on. These are all exposures your body, mind, and soul receive every single day. Now, it's not hard to imagine what kind of transformations these exposures can bring into your life. But I need you to pay attention. Pay attention to the current quality of your life and question yourself, how have you landed here? Compare your current version, the current version of yourself to the version of yourself 5 years ago. Are you overweight or underweight? This can be a result of the food that you're eating every single day throughout the years. Are you feeling more confident or more fearful? This can be a result of the series of events that have happened in your life and your reactions for it. All right? So the self-image you are projecting in your head, the quality of self-talk you are holding in your head, the belief system that you have formed over a period of time, these all can be direct results of how you think, how you feel, and act. And they are greatly influenced by the internal and external exposures. All kind of exposures program our mind to function a certain way. So if you're miserable and broke or mighty and successful, that may be because of the design of your mental blueprint, which forces you to think, feel, and act in a certain manner. In short, the quality of exposure determines the quality of the outcome of your life. All right? The quality of exposure determines the quality of the outcome of your life. Now, I told you all that at some point in your life, your potential has to become an insult to you. Has to become an insult to you. Potential should start in your life and make you aware and then push you to a place of action. It should start in your life to make you aware of what's within you, but then it should push you to a place of action. But after a while of inactivity, it should bother you that what has been identified as potential is still potential and not proven and completed work. All right? So a lot of us have potential inside of us, but because of things that we have not exposed ourselves to, it is still dormant ability and gifting. Right? Some things in you will never come to be until your mind is expanded to where it has the capacity to handle the weight of what's on the inside of you. All right? If you are a struggling employee and you have a struggling employee level tithing, then although it's in you, you don't have the capacity yet to handle employer level tithing. Right? So God has to expand you by exposing you to realms of influence you have yet to experience, circles that you are a rookie in, surroundings that are far beyond you so that you can be pulled up to the level of capacity. The law of exposure says that if I see it operative, active, or if I am introduced into another world, I am then able to discern parts of that which is in me. Revelation that you come into that describe you allows you the right to maximize the potential on the inside of you. Say this again. Revelation that you come into that describes you allows you to have the right to maximize the potential on the inside of you. If you are a prophet, but you are never around prophets, you will think that certain parts of your life or your personality are weird until you read or surround yourself with other people who are dealing with what you're dealing with. And you won't understand how to pull what's on the inside out of you until you have exposed yourself to that particular circle. All right? So exposure expands your mind. And after that expansion, it can never be decreased. Exposure expands your mind. And after your mind has been expanded, it can never be decreased. Once you have been exposed, your mind can never go back to its former level of smallness. Exposure stretches your appetite. Lord have mercy. Once your mind is exposed to something new and beyond the current, you now have the appetite that makes you aim towards that level of exposure. All right? I had a hunger for a nice big house with the basketball goal outside. That was the level of my exposure until I had an opportunity to stay with one of my mentors. And in my mentor's house, 21 rooms, 10-car garage, 3 or 4 kitchens, and tons of bathrooms, and a lake in the back, which exposed my mind and made me realize that what I thought I wanted, I really didn't want anymore. So now what I thought I wanted was just a desired stepping stone to the new level of exposure. Right? So you will never understand the high price of a tailor-made suit until you actually put one on. And then K&G becomes beneath you. Right? Why? Because exposure stretches your mind with the inability to decrease. Some of us have to humble ourselves enough to face that what we have learned and experienced are only our current thoughts because we have not yet been exposed to anything greater. We have no other options. If you grew up in a church where they had to wear white for communion, right? And all you know is wearing white for communion, your lack of exposure will then cause you to look down on the church that does it in jeans. If you grew up the praise and worship leader in your church, you were the choir director in your church, you were the lead singer in your church all your life growing up, then your feelings will be hurt when you go to another church and you're only good enough to be background. Why? Because limited exposure causes limited perspective. You will always think you are the best when you've never seen anything better. When I was growing up, my favorite car, and I think I told you all this before, my favorite car was a Chevy Camaro. No, Z28 Chevy Camaro. That was my favorite car. That's my favorite car. That's what I thought that was the best car in the world until my dad came home with a Jag. And then it changed my entire perspective, because what you currently think is so good is only good to you because you haven't been exposed to something greater. People ask the question, what keeps you humble? What keeps you humble? And when I receive this question, I don't have to go into some deep emotional rant about God's divine sovereignty in the midst of my flaws and my failures. No, the truth of the matter is my close friends preach better than me. I have mentors who can preach better sermons at a table conversation than I can in a pulpit. And because I have been exposed to that level, and now I have a level of humility in my life. You see, the more exposed you are, the more humble you become. Things that impress other people don't impress you because you've been exposed to something so far greater. I'm going to do it again this year, but last year, and I'm just talking tonight. Last year, I sent most of our leaders to visit other churches of different culture, different level, or just so much better than we are. Why? To expose and expand your mind, because it is hard to present exposure to the unexposed. Let me say that one more time. It is very hard. You see, and let me tell you this, as leaders, because you're leaders over different auxiliaries, it's very hard to expose something to the unexposed. It's very hard to get them to develop within them a level of passion for something on the level that you have the passion, because you've been exposed to something they haven't been exposed to. And I remember I went to Chicago, I think it was last year. I went to Chicago and I sat in a service. I sat in a church, and this is what was going on during the pre-service. This is before service starts. So all they're doing is they're playing videos and worship on the screens. That's all they're doing. And during this time, the people who were there were worshiping. They were on the altar. They were running around the church to the music that was playing through the system before service even started. Before service started, I sat back there in my seat in full devastation. And I came to the conclusion, my church is boring. I came back and I did a series called Culture Shift. But here's the thing. I taught you. I gave you the knowledge of what it would take to get us to that level of excitement and passion for prayer and worship. And 90% of our church still hasn't got it because you have the knowledge, but not the exposure. And knowledge and exposure is two different things. You can have the knowledge, but until you have been in the experience, you will not be able to open yourself to what can be developed that's on the inside of you. So some of you, that's how life is, because some of you, you don't come to church with the praise on your lips. You don't come to church to give God glory. You don't have an audible praise. It's too hard to get you to worship. It's too hard to get you to engage in intercession. Why? Because number one, you don't have a prayer life because you haven't been through much in your life. People who have been through stuff, people who have dealt with sickness and dealt with depression and dealt with heartbreak, we have a different outlook on life. So there's no way I can ever come into a service and not give God praise because I have been through too much that I thought I was going to drown in. I have been in too many situations where I thought if this gets exposed, my ministry is over. I've been in too many places where I have seen the grace and mercy of God rest upon my life. So my perspective is different based upon my exposure. So you can never, you can have all the knowledge, but until you have the experience, you will not be open to what is in you that can be developed. Exposure makes you think bigger. Lord have mercy. If I showed some of you the vision that God has given me for the future of this church, it will make you leave the church because it's too far above your level of exposure. You're not going to be able to handle the weight that comes with it. But whenever your exposure is on a certain level, it makes you think bigger. Whenever you begin to think big, it pushes you to an entirely different lifestyle, and that's a lifestyle of change. Can I tell you something? If your big thinking does not change your entire perspective on life, then small has disguised itself as big in your mind. If your big thinking does not change your entire perspective on life, then small has disguised itself as big in your mind. Your thought pattern, your work ethic, your speech, your appearance, your habits change based upon your level of exposure. It all changes when you come to the conclusion that what I want is bigger and I can't deal with small anymore. Exposure makes you say, what I have is not enough and what I'm thinking is too small. And if I'm thinking on this level, I may be settling. Lord have mercy. Ephesians 1, 17 and 18, Paul is praying. I'm almost done. Paul is praying, and he says, I pray that the eyes of your understanding might be enlightened, that you might know what is the hope of God's calling. Lord have mercy. He says, I want you to be exposed to what God is hoping for when he made you. Lord have mercy. If you are not exposed to that plan that God has for your life, you will be abused and not properly used because you don't know why you were made. If you are not exposed to that plan, then people will abuse you with their agenda. One of the most difficult things to do is work with people who have limited exposure. Lord have mercy. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to deal with people who have limited exposure. Why? Here's the reason. They are super judgmental. They are narrow-minded and always critical. They think the whole world is hinged upon their experience. We live in a time where people cling to absolutes. We love to feel like we know it all. And I said this yesterday, and I think I posted it, and that is that we must humble ourselves to be teachable. I'm going to deal with this a little bit more, but we have to humble ourselves to be teachable, because know-it-alls continually fail and continue to call failure success. Because based on your level of exposure, what you do is sufficient for you. That's why every time you are corrected, you continue to give resumes that you think place you on a level of competence, when in actuality it exposes your ignorance. One of the things I've noticed while pastoring is that when I'm correcting somebody, they always give me what they've learned and what they've experienced. And the only reason they do that is because they know they are incompetent, but they want to try to push their experience to make you think they are on a level that they're not. So we love to cling to absolutes. We think we have truths, when in actuality, we really just have prejudices. Prejudice, where you have prejudged situations that we have not really been exposed to, and we've drawn conclusions, haven't done the research, and we have made permanent decisions based off of poor information. Lack of exposure. Everybody say, I have to be exposed to more. Have to be exposed to more. God wants you out of your comfort zone. Stop prejudging things you haven't been exposed to. Watch this. You lose out on your level of effectiveness because of your lack of exposure. Lord have mercy. I'm going to say this again. You lose out on your level of effectiveness because of your lack of exposure. Hallelujah. When it comes to music, and you know, I'm a musician. But here's the thing. I understand my level of exposure. Okay? There was a time where I was on the drums and Zay was in the corner. Okay? There was that time. And based on our levels of exposure, I was the drummer. Then times change. Now, whenever I have questions concerning music and whenever I have questions concerning drums, I look to him. Why? Because he has expanded his mind. He has expanded his exposure to now he is now a teacher to those who he once learned from. Here's the problem. The problem is you people who, because you did it first, you can't learn from the person who does it better now. Watch this. You lose out on your level of effectiveness because of your lack of exposure. Let's talk about our text, all right? Paul says, so I can be effective, I expose myself to different aspects of people. So he says, so I became all things to all people. All right? Well, the only way you can become all things to all men is to be exposed to all men. How you are able to communicate with the Greeks, Paul? How are you able to communicate with the Greeks? How are you able to understand the language of the Greeks? We know that this is true because the Bible says that Paul spoke 13 languages, 7 of them fluently. Language is the key to culture, and if Paul was going to be effective in many circles, he had to expose himself by learning that culture, expanding his mind to embrace and understand that culture. Therefore, in any scenario, if we want change in the culture of our church, we have to change our language. If we want a praising church, then we have to speak praise. Lord have mercy. That's why I have to get some of you in expanded circles and atmospheres, because you are so negative. You are so negative. You lack the ability to create healthy chemistry in the church. You can barely get along with each other because your mind is so small due to a lack of exposure. Whew. You must humble yourself. You must humble yourself to be teachable. Lord have mercy. You must humble yourself to be teachable. Let me tell you this. Let me tell you this. I love our worship team. Our worship team is phenomenal. They are phenomenal. But if they can never see any room for improvement, it is due to a lack of exposure. You can love your church. We teach you to love your church. Be prideful about your church. Be excited about your church. But if you think that this is the best church, it is due to your lack of exposure. No matter who you are, what level you're on, there's always somebody somewhere that's doing it better. So you must humble yourself to be teachable. I'm coming to a close. That's why it's the best way to not miss the lesson when exposure is present. That's the best way not to miss the lesson when exposure is present, is to be teachable. Developing a teachable attitude should be on the top of your self-development plan, because everything else is directly related to how teachable you are, how open you are to new information. You cannot grow if you are not willing to change. If you're not willing to accept new perspectives on life and change your habits. Watch this. Your level of teachability might dictate your level of happiness and success in your life. Why? Because to become successful in any industry, you have to constantly work on keeping up with the latest information and technology. But you can only become as successful as your level of teachability. One of the hardest things to deal with is people who are not teachable. Every time you tell them something, they already know. My question is, if you already know, why aren't you already doing? Your teachability index has the power to create lasting success, because if you constantly work on learning new material, learning new stuff, you constantly work on growing yourself as a human being, which keeps you happy and successful. Once you stop learning, you are not actually standing still, you are going backwards. Because God always allows everything to keep expanding and moving forward. So you either learn something every day, that's growth, or you take the know-it-all attitude and you die, metaphorically speaking. Right? It's pretty easy to tell if you or someone is open to learning new information. So you are teachable if you seek help. I'm weary of people who think they can do everything themselves. You don't need help with anything. It's okay to say, I need help. You're teachable if you can accept that others' opinion might be better than yours. Lord have mercy. Oh, it takes humility. It takes humility. You're teachable if you take notes. You're teachable if you learn from criticism. If all criticism shuts you down, makes you mad, makes you want to quit, number one, you're arrogant. Criticism is to be discerned, not ignored. Because some people will criticize you because they can't stand you. Even in that criticism, you can learn how to grow. If you're teachable if you take responsibility for your failures and seek lessons to learn. In pastoring, let me speak from this experience. In pastoring, when I see people, because every church has a revolving door that we're trying to close, but people leave the church, or people get mad and they don't have a heart for the church anymore. I step back. Before I start rebuking, before I start correcting, I step back and say, where did I fail in this? Because it's not going to make me a better pastor if I think that everything bad that happens in the church is sometimes not my fault. That brings me to this point, to those of you who love to play the victim, and everything that happens in your life is somebody else's fault. All right, to be teachable, you have to read books and seek answers. You focus on solutions. You live a conscious life and learn from all kinds of situations. Watch this. You are so aware that you learn from other people's mistakes. Oh, yes, this is next level. You are so aware that you learn from other people's mistakes. You're teachable because you love to get out of your comfort zone. You're teachable if you love to try something new, if you are open to doing things that are totally different. You're teachable if you are confident in changing your routine. You're teachable if you admit when you're wrong. I want to go too fast for those of you taking notes. I will email you this sermon. You're teachable if you have a mentor or you're looking for one. Now, I need to say something there because this is the day and age of people looking for mentors. Okay? But here's the thing you have to understand about mentors. Mentors are coaches that push you to do what's on the inside of you. They're not to do it for you. You don't look for a mentor to take on the responsibility of what's on the inside of you. You're teachable if you ask questions and have a curious attitude. Here's the last thing. You're teachable if you are aware that you don't know everything and you are open to learning. Tell your neighbor this, or tell somebody near you this. Go ahead and hurt their feelings. It's going to hurt, okay? Tell them. Say, neighbor, you don't know everything. That just crushed some of you. You don't. Paul says, I want to be successful in this. He says, I want to do this for the sake of the gospel that I may share in his blessings. I want to be successful in this. So I become all things to all people, which means I had to put myself in expanded circles. I had to surround myself with people who were better than me. One of the compliments that you get a lot of compliments when you're in ministry, but one of the compliments that I look to hear is you preach like an old man. That makes me feel good. Because I surround myself with people who have been doing this far longer than I have. Why? Because if you've already made it through this, you're already successful at this, then you know the pros and cons and can help me have more pros than cons. So you have to surround yourself with people and watch this, listen. We are in this building right now, not because I have influence on Facebook, people give money. We're in this building right now because your pastor listens. Watch this. Listen and then follow directions. Because I told you, this is a know-it-all generation. But you have to get to the place where you can listen and follow instructions. When my mentor speaks, when my spiritual father speaks, I listen. I learned that throughout the years, from being in your 20s, and, when you're younger, you think you know it all. You think you know it all. You think you got all the answers. And so you have to fall and bump your head. And I talked to you all Sunday about how I had to rebuild credit. Why? Because I didn't listen when they said, don't do this, don't do that. And because I didn't listen, I had to suffer the consequences. And then it opened my eyes to see, oh, that's why. I had to go through repossession. Then it opened my eyes to see, oh, That's why I got to pay it. When you get to the place where you can listen and follow directions, it will open a world of blessing to you, a world of more to you. Everybody standing, we're getting ready to pray. I think that it's very important, and as I said, I will, anyone who wants this, I will actually email it to you so that you can have it to review and study. But I think it's very important that you expand yourself. When I hear certain things that go on in our church, and I hear how some of you talk, and I hear how some of you deal with each other, I know that you have limited exposure. You know why? Because not only does exposure make you have a different mental perspective, but exposure also matures you.